There has always been something about you that felt out of place. You tried to fit in. You tried to shrink yourself down, to soften your voice, to mute your light. You wore masks to make others comfortable, to avoid being questioned, ridiculed, or rejected. And for a while, it worked. You blended in just enough to pass as ordinary. But deep down, something within you kept pulling at the seams of that disguise. You couldn't explain why, but you always knew this world didn't feel like home. Not entirely. That discomfort you carried wasn't a curse. It was a clue, a sacred signal from a universe that you were never designed to walk the common path. You were marked for something greater, something different. You weren't meant to move like the rest. You weren't meant to fit in, because you were created to stand out. That aching misalignment was not your failure. It was a divine whisper, reminding you that your essence cannot be contained in the mold others live in. You weren't made to fit. You were made to awaken. Before we dive into this message fully, pause for a moment. Take a breath. Chosen one, you didn't find this video by accident. There's a reason these words have reached you in this moment. If you feel something stirring in your spirit, it's because a call over your life is being activated again. So I ask you, watch this video to the end, and when you are ready, write your most heartfelt wishes along with 777 in the comments below. This is more than a habit. It is a moment of liberation. It is a spark that sends energy into the universe. It is a wave that reminds you that your voice, your dreams, and your intentions still matter. And as you declare them, expect the unexpected. If you like the video and it enlightens you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's talk about the real reason you never fit in. It was never about your personality. It wasn't your style, your preferences, or your choices. It was your frequency. Your spirit has always moved to a different rhythm. When others were satisfied with shallow conversation, you yearned for soul talk. When the world ran toward chaos, your intuition pulled you into stillness. And when others bowed to fear, something in you rose with quiet defiance. You weren't trying to be different. You were just obeying something higher. This made you a mirror, and people didn't always like what they saw in you. Your presence made their unresolved wounds surface. Your peace disturbed their patterns. Your clarity cut through their illusions. And so they labeled you strange. They questioned your path. They tried to clip your wings with judgment and doubt. But through it all, something in you refused to break. Even if you stumbled, even if you hid, even if you doubted yourself, that inner flame never fully went out. And here's the truth they never told you. Being set apart was never a punishment. It was preparation. The very things that made you feel isolated were actually sharpening your discernment. The people who left weren't subtracting from your life. They were making room for the right ones. The opportunities you lost weren't rejections. They were redirections. Every moment of discomfort was a divine test wrapped in silence. But you passed. You passed every unseen test when you chose integrity over approval. When you stayed kind even after betrayal. When you listened to your inner voice when the noise around you was deafening. You passed when you held on to faith while others mocked your vision. You passed when you kept going, even when you were unsure of what waited ahead. You passed not because you were perfect, but because you were faithful. And now the shift begins. The season you're stepping into will reveal why you were never meant to blend in. The separation was not a rejection. It was a calling. You were being pulled away so you could be poured into. You were being trained in the dark so you could lead in the light. Everything you thought was strange about you, your intensity, your emotions, your deep perception, was never a flaw. It was your preparation. Your uniqueness is not an obstacle. It is your key. Stay ready, chosen one, because this next chapter won't ask you to prove yourself. It will confirm who you've always been. You see, your difference was not random. It was intentional. Long before you took your first breath, you were wired to carry a message, a code, a vibration that the world desperately needed but didn't know how to receive. You were sent here not just to exist, but to awaken. And to do that, the world couldn't be allowed to mold you. That's why you felt friction in places others found comfort. That's why normal never satisfied you. Your soul knew that if you conformed, You'd lose what made you rare. So it resisted, quietly at first, then louder, until you had no choice but to stop pretending. This resistance was a rebellion. It was remembrance, a remembering of who you are and what you came here to do. And even though you tried to silence that knowing, drowning in distractions, people, plans, and expectations, it never truly left, because truth has a way of waiting until you're ready to see with spiritual eyes, waiting until the illusions crack and you begin to feel the pull. That pull was your calling, gently but firmly reminding you, you are not here to blend in, you are here to wake up. And now, the illusions are shattering, the noise is fading, the distractions that used to consume you are starting to feel empty. You're craving alignment. You're noticing synchronicities, numbers repeating, conversations that feel divinely timed, a subtle but undeniable sense that something is about to shift within and around you. That is not imagination. That is awareness. Your frequency is rising, and with it, your clarity. But here's the part that few talk about. The awakening is not always beautiful. It's not all light and peace and bliss. Often, it starts with chaos, the breakdown, the unraveling, the loss of everything that once defined you. Your friendships begin to fade. The job no longer fulfills you. The dreams you chase start to feel hollow, and in that emptiness, you may feel like you're failing, but you're not. You are shedding. You are being emptied so that truth can find space to settle in. You may feel like you're losing yourself, but in truth, you're finding your essence, because what's leaving is not the real you. It's a version of you that was shaped by survival, fear, and external validation. And that version has served its purpose. It got you here, but it cannot take you further. This next phase of your life requires your full presence, your unapologetic light, your undiluted voice. No more shrinking, no more settling, no more tolerating energy that dishonors your spirit. You were never meant to live in half-light. You are the full flame, and it's time you saw yourself that way. The world may have tried to convince you that your sensitivity was weakness, that your visions were fantasies, that your depth was too much. But those were projections, not truth. The truth is, your sensitivity is sacred. It allows you to feel what others ignore. Your visions are divine. They are glimpses of the future you're meant to build. And your depth, that's your power. Shallow minds will never understand oceans, and that's okay. You weren't sent for everyone. You were sent for those ready to awaken. So don't resent the path that made you different. Honor it. Every tear, every silence, every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, every moment you questioned your worth. They were all ingredients in your awakening. They carved you, purified you, refined your sight. And now, you are no longer who you were. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are being aligned. You are being called. And what's coming will make sense of what nearly broke you. You've likely felt the tension rising lately. That subtle but constant pressure, like something inside of you is stretching beyond its limits. It's not just you. That discomfort is spiritual expansion, a sacred discomfort that precedes every transformation. The world around you might still look the same, but internally, the landscape has shifted. Your mind is clearer. Your spirit is louder. Your tolerance for what drains you is disappearing. And the reason is simple. You're outgrowing who you pretended to be. You've been playing roles to survive, the good one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't make waves. But your spirit was never meant to be tamed like that. You weren't born to be small. You were born to remember your divinity and take up the space that your calling demands. And now, the roles are collapsing. The masks are falling off. The lies you once told yourself to keep peace with the world are cracking under the pressure of truth. You're realizing you were never really fitting in. You were just squeezing your soul into spaces that weren't built to hold you. And no matter how much you adjusted, minimized, or twisted yourself, there was always a deep ache, an ache for alignment, an ache to be seen for who you really are, without shrinking to make others comfortable. That ache, it was a compass. It was showing you what no longer belongs. It was whispering that your becoming requires release. And that's what's happening now. the divine unmaking. It may look like things are falling apart, but they're actually falling into place. You are being separated from what's safe, so you could discover what's sacred. The quiet season was not punishment. It was preparation. You were being hidden, not forgotten. God pulled you back so you wouldn't be exposed too early. So the wrong people wouldn't have access to your becoming. So the dream could incubate in silence, where it couldn't be diluted by doubt or dismantled by noise. And even when you begged for movement, begged for answers, signs, anything, all you got was stillness. But in that stillness, you were being strengthened. Your character was being chiseled. Your vision was being clarified. Your heart was being trained to hold what you're about to carry. Because you were never meant to build from panic or perform from pain. You were meant to move from peace. A peace so deep it can't be disturbed by outcomes, timelines, or opinions. And now, that time of unveiling is near. The doors that stayed shut are starting to move. The people you're meant to meet are being aligned behind the scenes. The opportunities that once bypassed you are circling back. And it's not because you force anything. It's because you finally align with your truth. That alignment is what opens gates no man can close. You no longer need to chase. You are magnetic now. And what's meant for you is drawn to your frequency. That's why the past few months felt so intense. You were being tuned. And when you're tuned to truth, everything false must fall away. Don't fight the falling. Let it. Let what was never real dissolve. Let what you've outgrown be released. Let who you're not die, so who you really are can rise. There's something sacred about the moment you stop trying to be understood and start embracing who you are in silence. For the longest time, you thought your purpose had to be explained, justified, or even proven. You carried the weight of being misunderstood like it was a curse. But now, you're beginning to see it was actually your protection. Because if everyone had understood you, they might have tried to contain you. And you were never meant to be contained. You were designed to disrupt, to awaken, to shift atmospheres just by being who you are. And that kind of light unsettles the dark. That kind of truth unsettles comfort. That's why people distance themselves when you started speaking differently, moving differently, thinking differently. Your evolution confronted their stagnation. And not everyone is ready to grow when you are. So they called you distant, strange, rebellious. Too much. But what they didn't realize is that the version of you they were comfortable with was a version you had already outgrown. You weren't walking away in arrogance. You were walking away in alignment. You weren't changing because you were confused. You were changing because you were being called higher. And sometimes being called higher means walking alone for a while. It's in that loneliness that you found clarity. In the silence, you started to hear your own voice again. Not the voice molded by expectations, not the one shaped by shame or guilt, but the one buried beneath the noise. The one that says, you were always meant for more. That voice reminded you that delay is not denial. That detour was not a mistake. It was an invitation to rest, to reevaluate, to shed old skin and grow new strength. While the world told you to push harder, God told you to pause deeper. And in that pause, the healing began. The healing wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It came in waves of surrender. When you finally let go of trying to fix what broke you and started focusing on building what's next. Healing came when you chose peace over proving. When you stopped explaining and started embodying. When you stopped trying to be chosen by others and realized you were already chosen by something far greater. This is what transformation looks like in real time. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as waking up and choosing yourself again and again. It's rewriting your inner dialogue. It's honoring your energy. It's walking away from what doesn't align without needing to make it loud. You become someone new, not because you want attention, but because you answered a quiet calling that most ignore. And now, the reward for that obedience is beginning to form. Not all at once, not in fireworks, but in moments of peace that you can't explain, in ideas that come out of nowhere, in divine timing that feels too perfect to be coincidence, in doors that open without you knocking, because your name was already in the room before you arrived. That's what happens when you choose alignment over approval. That's what happens when you stop trying to blend in and start allowing yourself to stand in the fullness of your calling. There was a moment, perhaps so quiet you didn't even recognize it, when your soul stopped waiting for permission. You stopped waiting to be seen, applauded, validated. And in that quiet moment, something powerful shifted. You stepped into the reality that you don't need to be understood to be anointed. You don't need an audience to carry light. You don't need applause to awaken purpose. Your assignment was never dependent on their acceptance. It was forged in isolation, shaped in obscurity, and refined in silence. You were being sharpened where no one could see you. While others were busy performing, you were healing. While others were chasing validation, you were building character. You were shedding layers of who the world told you to be and uncovering the divine blueprint of who you really are. And that process hurt deeply, not because you were broken, but because growth often feels like breaking before it looks like becoming. There were nights you cried and no one knew. Days you smiled and no one realized it was just a mask. And still, you kept moving. Still, you kept rising. Not because it was easy, but because something in you knew you were being called for the fire, not consumed by it. People often mistake silence for weakness. They think if you're quiet, you're lost. If you're calm, you're defeated. But you've learned that silence is a strategy. Stillness is a weapon. And while they were shouting, you were listening. While they were fighting for the spotlight, you were aligning with something eternal. And now, because you didn't quit in the cocoon, you are being prepared to fly. You become someone who no longer begs for clarity. You create it. You don't demand loyalty. You radiate it. You no longer chase belonging. You embody it. That shift came because you embraced the silence and allowed it to mold you. That shift came because you realized not being invited was protection. Not being understood was confirmation. Not being chosen by them was evidence that you were already chosen by destiny. And when you finally stopped striving to be seen, everything hidden within you began to rise. This is why you've been feeling that inner tension, that restlessness, that unexplainable sense that something is about to click into place. It's not just your imagination. It's a resonance of purpose preparing to unfold. The reason it feels unfamiliar is because you've never been here before. You've never been this version of you before. Stronger, wiser, rooted. And what's coming is not just a reward for the pain. It's a reward for the patience, for the trust, for the decision to walk with faith even when the path was foggy, for choosing healing over hiding, truth over pretending, growth over comfort. You didn't blend in because you weren't made to. You weren't forgotten. You were reserved, set aside, guarded, like a sacred flame protected from the wind, waiting for the exact moment to ignite. And that moment is drawing closer. They looked at you and saw someone who didn't fit. But heaven looked at you and saw someone who was being set apart. You were never meant to match the world's expectations because you carry something it's never seen before. That's why the rejection was intense. That's why the doors slammed shut. That's why every time you try to force your way into certain places or relationships, something always felt off. You thought it was your fault, that you weren't enough. But what you didn't know is that your spirit was too expansive for the rooms you tried to shrink yourself into. You weren't being denied, you were being redirected. Because when you are chosen, your journey cannot look like everyone else's. You're not supposed to walk the same path. You're not supposed to settle for what's familiar. You were designed to break patterns, not repeat them. And so life began to strip away everything that wasn't aligned with your true self. Friends disappeared. Plans fell apart. Dreams shifted. And in the middle of all that loss, you discovered something priceless. Your voice. Not the one they trained you to use, but the one that was buried deep within your soul. The voice that trembles when it first speaks, but roars when it finally remembers who it is. They said you were too intense, too sensitive, too different. But that sensitivity, it was your gift. That intensity, it was your fire. And that difference, it was your divine signature. You stopped seeking to be fixed and started realizing you were being formed. You stopped explaining yourself and started protecting your peace. You stopped asking why it happened and started trusting that every storm came a message, a revelation, a reorientation. Because the truth is, you were never lost. You were simply being led off the main road, so you could build the kind of strength you'd need for what's next. You were being taught how to hear in silence, how to see in darkness, how to stand alone, not as punishment, but as preparation, so that when the time came, you wouldn't just show up, you would arrive. The world has a way of rewarding visibility, but heaven rewards endurance. You endured, quietly, privately, without applause. And now, what's been developing beneath the surface is about to rise, not to impress others, but to fulfill the assignment that was written for you before anyone else had an opinion about your worth. This is why nothing worked when you tried to be like them. This is why you were always the one who felt things deeply, who saw beyond the surface, who couldn't pretend even when pretending would have made life easier. Because you weren't called to survive by blending in. You were called to shift the atmosphere by standing out. Your story was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be sacred. And now, after all this time, the sacred is beginning to shine. There's a moment, so quiet, so subtle, where everything begins to shift. You don't always notice it when it happens, because it doesn't come a loud announcement or dramatic sign. But suddenly, the things that used to shake you no longer have power. The people who overlooked you suddenly start to wonder where your strength came from. And that ache you carried in silence starts to make sense. Because now, you see why you had to walk through it alone. You realize the quiet season wasn't about isolation. It was about insulation. You weren't abandoned, you were covered. You weren't forgotten, you were being refined. And now, as the layers of doubt peel away, what's left is clarity, not just about your past, but about your purpose. The strange thing is, the transformation didn't begin the moment things got better. It began the moment you stopped fighting the stillness, when you surrendered the need to be understood, when you gave up trying to explain your process to people who weren't assigned to understand it, when you stopped asking for permission to evolve and just started moving differently. That's when heaven took notice. Not because you performed, but because you aligned. This is the essence of the chosen path. Alignment over approval, peace over validation, obedience over popularity. And you've chosen that path, even when it meant letting go of everything that made you feel safe. You chose the unseen over familiar. And now, the unseen is about to manifest. That's why certain people are starting to resurface. Not because they're meant to be part of your next season, but because your light is starting to expose what they try to keep hidden, not just from you, but from themselves. You see, you became a mirror, and not everyone is ready to face their reflection. But this isn't a season for looking back. This is a season for planting your feet, lifting your head, and stepping fully into the identity that was always waiting beneath the ashes. You're no longer trying to prove anything. You're simply becoming. Becoming what the struggle was shaping. Becoming what the silence was awakening. Becoming what the fire was refining. Becoming who you were always meant to be, without fear, without apology, without shrinking. And that, chosen one, is what makes you unstoppable now. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've been through enough to finally ask the right questions. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And real carries weight that artificial never will. So, while others chase noise, you're moving in substance. While they clamor for attention, you walk with intention. And while they fear the unknown, you've learned to trust the unseen. Because your story isn't ending, it's aligning. And alignment is the greatest evidence that transformation has occurred. You didn't just change, you became. You've made it through the silence, through the stillness, through the seasons where everything felt stripped away and nothing made sense. And yet, you're still standing, not just surviving, but glowing with a deeper awareness. One that was never possible until everything else was quieted. Because now, you can hear clearly what was always speaking inside you. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to follow the crowd. You were never built for the background. You were created to shift atmospheres, to speak when others stay silent, to carry presence where there is emptiness. You were chosen to change everything. The quiet season taught you how to listen again, to intuition, to the voice of the divine, to the whispers of destiny. It trained your spirit to recognize alignment, not just opportunity. It showed you what to walk away from and what to walk toward. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. And now, every delay begins to look like a doorway. Every no starts to feel like divine redirection. You no longer mourn what didn't happen. You praise what didn't destroy you. Because if you had moved before you were ready, if you had entered rooms you weren't prepared for, you might have lost yourself trying to keep what wasn't meant to stay. But now you know. What's for you cannot miss you. And what's not for you can no longer distract you. You've passed the test that most people never recognize. They're in the test of patience, the test of silence, the test of identity. You chose integrity when shortcuts were tempting. You chose stillness when noise was applauded. You chose obedience when logic told you to run. And for that, you're being elevated, not in the way the world recognizes, but in the way heaven rewards. Because true elevation begins within. The rise happens in your posture before it shows up in your platform. Your internal world has shifted, and everything outside of you must now align with that truth. It's not magic. It's not coincidence. It's alignment. You're no longer begging for access. You become the access. You're no longer praying for visibility. You carry light that cannot be hidden. And that's why the next season won't look like the last. Because you're not the same person who entered that quiet season. You're coming out sharper, lighter, clearer, and more grounded than ever before. You become someone who can handle the weight of what's coming. Someone who understands that delay is not denial, it's design. Divine design. So when they ask where you've been, you won't need to explain. Your presence will answer for you. Your peace will speak volumes. And your posture will reveal everything. That the quiet season was your greatest protection. That the silence wasn't absence. It was strategy. That the hiddenness wasn't rejection. It was refinement. And now, chosen one, it's your time. Not to prove anything, not to perform, but simply to be. To be the fullness of everything the silence shaped. To be the clarity that others seek. To be the evidence that sometimes the greatest battles happen in stillness. And that those who endure quietly rise the loudest. So step forward, not with haste, but with certainty. Not in fear, but in authority. Because your footsteps are ordered now. Your voice is calibrated now. And your spirit is aligned now. This is your becoming. There's a moment after the breakthrough. Quiet, still, almost sacred, where your spirit exhales. Not because the journey is over, but because you finally know why it had to be the way it was. And in that knowing, a new strength rises. Not the kind that shouts or demands attention, but the kind that glows softly, deeply from within. You've passed through the season of silence, through hiddenness, through internal fire. And what's left now is not just a survivor. It's a vessel, refined, aligned, unshakable. Everything that once confused you now stands as confirmation. Every unanswered question was training you to walk by trust, not by sight. The closed doors taught you discernment. The long waits taught you resilience. And the moments where nothing seemed to move, those were the most important. Because they taught you how to move differently. Not by fear, not by pressure, but by divine timing. And now, you carry a kind of wisdom that can't be bought or taught, only earned through experience. You become a mirror of the process itself. Quiet, slow, often misunderstood, but powerful beyond measure. You are evidence that a delay is not a death sentence. It's a deeper invitation, one that calls only those with the patience to wait, the strength to trust, and the courage to transform. This is not the beginning of your journey. It's the elevation of it, not a restart, but a resurrection. Because the version of you that once sought validation is gone. The one who doubted their worth, who questioned their path, who begged for clarity. That person was necessary, but temporary. In their place now stands someone who remembers, someone who knows who they are, knows what they carry, knows they were never meant to blend in, because they were meant to stand out. So go ahead, chosen one, take the next step with peace. Move forward with grace. Speak with the authority that only silence can birth. Because what's coming isn't just your reward, it's your return. You're not coming back as the same person. You're coming back crowned.